So in this video, I'm going to be talking about a concept I call design attractors. I find it very useful to be thinking about this in when doing design and thinking about the process of making a game, and hopefully it's going to be useful for you too. It's something I'm going to be coming back to hopefully in other videos as well, and because it's a very interesting concept. And starting out, I'm going to use this to answer three questions. And the first of them is, why do games end up being fairly similar to one another? Like, if it's the same genre, they're basically the same. You see this with a lot of games. They have like a crafting system, cover shooting mechanics, whatnot. And why do we see that sort of thing? The other thing is that if you ever develop a game, you know that at the start of the game, you're like, yeah, game, go and do this. The game is sort of obeying your commands. Whereas as time moves on, it's the game that's telling you what it wants to be. And so why is that? Why is the game like deciding after a while how it wants to be? And the other thing is, something I've been thinking about a lot is that a lot of my old design ideas that the project started out with, feels a bit crappy, whereas the last ones in the project are always a lot better than the earlier ones. So like, why is this? Why is it that the earlier ones end up being so bad and newer ones feeling so good? So in order to answer all of these and a little bit more, I'm gonna go into this concept of design attractors. And for that, we need to graph the game, and in a sort of, I'll get to that. Let's think about the axis in the graph representing the properties of a feature. So let's say the x-axis is the speed at which the character moves, like how fast is this character going to be moving, and let's say that the y-axis is how high the character can jump. And so this is say a platforming game, a Mario type game. And what you end up with is that depending on what properties you decide set for these features, you're going to end up in different areas of the graph. So here we have someone where there's a very slow character but jumps high. Here is a fast character that also jumps high, and here's just a fast character. So you end up like, if you're on like an infinite runner, your character can't jump at all, and here would be just a pure jumping game. Not sure I can know any games that are like that, but I'm sure they are. So you end up with a wide range of possibilities of how to make your platforming game. Now the thing is that there is always going to be a sort of golden zone, a Goldilocks zone, where everything feels better. And this is typically where like a Mario game is like it can't be too fast, it's going to be hard to control, can't be too slow, going to feel sluggish, can't jump too high, going to feel floaty, can't jump too low, or it's going to be feeling too heavy. So you have this zone here where it feels the best. And the thing is that if you start outside of that zone and start playtesting, your game is going to gravitate. It's going to be attracted to that specific zone. And that is what this design attraction is all about. So what you can think about are these sort of zones here. And this can be large, they can be small, it can be like almost point-like, like an optimal way of doing it. But normally it has a bit of a range. It's not like one exact setting on these things is going to be the best. It's going to be arranged where it feels best. And obviously it depends a lot on the context as well. But in any case, there is a zone that feels the best and it's going to attract. So if you start nearby it, your game is going to be pulled towards it. Now, it might not be the only zone. There might be other zones out there. Perhaps they're smaller, there could be large. The main thing is they're further away. So they're gonna have smaller amount of attraction to them. And this is just because like you're not gonna, and reasoning, why do they have this sort of attraction? Because if I move in this direction, it's not gonna obviously feel better But if I move here, I'm gonna be closer to it. I'm like, oh, I'm getting somewhere. And whereas here's this like you move a lot and you're like, yeah, it's still pretty bad. I guess this was a bad idea. Whereas if you had moved, you would have gotten there eventually, but it's much harder to do so. So you can sort of picture it of being swimming around in the ocean, out there a shipwreck, and you see an island of the horizon. And then you can also perhaps make out some other island here in sort of shrouded in fog, but you're not gonna go for this one. You're gonna go for this one because that's the closest one, and that's how a lot of the game development works. You're gonna be aiming for, that, because it's a very hard process. So you look in this direction, and it's like, oh, land. In this direction is like, perhaps land, but perhaps you drown as you try to swim there because, drown in this case, run out of money, time, patience, I don't know what. In any case, this is what's going to be the attraction point. So this is the whole concept. So let's dig down to this. A few caveats. One is, I said there were 2 features to this. There is hundreds of features to this. So it's not just a 2-dimensional blob, it's a multi-dimensional blob that goes off in all directions. Unfortunately, I'm really bad at drawing multi-dimensional blobs, so I'm not going to be trying to do that. I'm not going to try to draw 3D blobs, except for a few examples. But what you can think about it as is that this little blob here, if you zoom in on it, there's a bunch of features that covers at every point. So every point you have like features 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. And they're covered by all small features, and they all have different values. So that's how we want to be thinking about it, not just these 2 values. But the 2D graph is like a abstract representation, sort of where we're going at. And also another thing is that when we have this graph, we can clearly see there is a goal. So you can think about it as, why are you, thinking about a designer, thinking about these graphs, like, why are they not heading for that interesting island out there or whatnot? Because it's not that clear. Like the vision, you're not seeing the summit of this mountain where the higher the better. You're not seeing it that clearly. You don't see a path you can walk there. Instead, you're sort of standing in front of a big wall of fog, and perhaps, just perhaps, there is a mountain there. This is also why, if you know that some game made something in some way, you can sort of, yeah, that game, the cover-based shooter with crafting. Yeah, that's a thing. Now I'm like feeling that, cover-based shooters feels like it was a thing that happened in the past. But now it would be open world shooter with crafting. I don't know what it would be. When you're watching this video, but in any case, there is some game that there's lots of those. Okay, so that's what happens when we have this sort of feature. There's a lot of games, they look a lot of the same, and they start out like here, and then there's going to be this attraction point that's going to be pulling them in, and perhaps there is this sort of magical fairyland and so on that has all of these sort of cool stuff, but no one is going to start here. If you have a really big budget, you're going to be like, yeah, here is something we can sort of know and understand, and that's just going to be pulling them in, even though they try and do it. So if you have like a cool feature, so it's like if there is a unicorn in your game, so like no other game has unicorns, most games are going to be using that a tiny bit. So if you think about this space here, this X and Y axis, is gonna represent the sort of known classical, whatever, the safe bets, and that's sort of this zone here. And then you have this sort of unicorn, and you don't want to you don't want to get out of this zone, so you only nudge it a little bit, and that's often why you sort of feel like, yeah, the game has a cool unicorn feature, but I mean, it's not really used. It's more of a gimmick. That's why this comes from. But there might be this blob or whatever here, another zone further away for a unicorn feature, oh, that's going to be amazing. Thing is though that you have to travel really far down the road of the unicorn feature, and you also have to travel far away from the safe zone. And the thing to know is that it's not that you're traveling and things get better. The moment you start going away from this safe zone here, the game gets worse. So the entirety of this trip, you have a bad game. And then, somewhere around here-ish, like, oh shit, there might be something to it, but it might not be. It might just be a mirage on the horizon that you're going towards. So, like, we have this sort of crap distance here. So, in the end, most games just, yes, they stay in this and they just end up here. And if there's any changes, they do like small changes to the safe formula. The other thing is now, what if we have why is the game pulling us in a direction as we're making it? So at the beginning of the game, we have like a few features, and the game is not even done, so we're not assuming it should be fun or engaging or whatever you're aiming for at that point. So you have more freedom of movement, and also these features are not that interconnected, and it's easier to move things around. But as time moves on and we get further and further down the design process, you get more features, more stuff, more different features that connect with one another, that gets they become stakeholders or what you want to be calling it. And all of a sudden, the pull on this safe zone, on this Goldilocks zone, is going to be really, really big. So really, really strong, and you're just going to be pulled in there. So that's why you feel this sort of like at the beginning, you can sort of like move freely, but when you come to this, like the game's pulling you, that's when you're in this sort of area. And what happens is that the moment you're in this zone and you add a new feature, this purple feature here, like you're just going to be go back, you go outside, the game got worse, and you go back in again, and you perhaps have some small perturbation. Now, there perhaps was a really good way of using this feature, but again, we have this sort of like game is crap zone that you have to plow through, and that's gonna be a lot of work, and gonna take a lot of convincing people that, I know there is something on the horizon. You're probably not going to do it. You're going to have to convince yourself at the very least. It's even harder to convince others. Final thing. So the bad ideas at the start. Why do I have it? Like in Soma, I reread some design documents, and there were just horrible ideas of you placed mines and you pulled out electrical guns and stuff. Like, it blows my mind that these thoughts even existed at that point. They didn't work. I don't know how they were supposed to be working, but okay, so let's think about it like this instead. Is that you could start your game around here, and that's sort of like where we have this sort of safe zone, and area is going to be pulled back into that. But for some games, like Soma is a good example, because Soma had like a really weird thematic goal, which was to like have a first person's perspective of what consciousness is. So then you sort of start around here, because you don't really have an idea of what you're doing at that point. And instead of having like a nice trajectory as you get attracted to, the Goldilocks zone in that area, you're not going to be close to it the first thing you do. So every idea here is most likely going to be a bad one. There is like a trajectory going here, like here are the good ideas, or the ideas that can become good, but you're going to be doing a lot of hit and miss. So at the beginning, ideas are just going to be bad, because they're far away from this zone where the game is good. So when you make a game like this, I'm not sure, like this is how a lot of the games we've made have felt, at least, is that you make a lot of leap of faith. You just jump off the cliff and hope that there is something, like you splash into the ocean and you sort of hope that on the horizon there are these islands that you can swim to. And it's sort of hard work in thinking about this, and and it can be really hard to convince yourself that there's actually something out there. But what you end up with is also this feeling that past you was an idiot that came up with these ideas and convinced someone else on the team that they were good ones. But in fact, you should expect that to happen. You should expect ideas, if you do this sort of leap of faith, to start out bad. And it's almost a good indicator if you can look back on your design document and have a lot of really bad ideas, because that means, okay, we're actually in uncharted territory. Whereas if all ideas actually worked at the very beginning, then you're probably like going to end up with something that's, safer bet. Like, that doesn't mean it's going to be bad by any means, but and you can be really lucky, like why not? You could end up here, and then like you get attracted to this point immediately. But you shouldn't expect that to be the case. So some final musings on this. I've gone on for too long, probably. Hopefully everyone's still listening in on this. But another thing to think about. So one thing that can happen in these games is that you are set between a rock and a hard place, sort of, where you have a feature or two features that I want to combine, because in your head they're awesome, but they're pulling the game in different directions. So like the game here is like a bunch of features. So say here's like 100 features that already exist that needs to work together. I don't know, it can be any simple things as movement to how dialogue works, how, whatever, interactions and so forth. So say that you want to have a game. So again, I'm thinking Soma, where you like, I want to have monsters that are hunting the player, but I also want this sort of cerebral, high-level storyline. And then you're like, this is just going to be a tug of war in the end. So your game is going to be like pulled in one direction and the other direction. And the worst part is that you might run out of time or whatever, and the game is going to be stuck here at release. It's not going to be in any of the good zones. This is something that happens all the time when games try out new things, and it's so when you ever get like, this game has a lot of good ideas, pretty janky. This is what happened. This is where it went wrong. And the only real way of fixing this is just, or the simplest at least. There are other ways, but it's just removing all of the attraction points and just except one, and let that sort of, in this case would be like for Soma, I think like we're gonna do with the story things and just leave the monsters out. In Soma we sort of left the monsters in, and I think that's, in hindsight, it's probably a bad idea. But again, I think some people like them and so on. Not gonna get into this now. Another thing that can happen is that you have a feature that you really want. Say that this is some sort of narrative thing, but you might have other features that are blocking, so that you have certain features in the game that when they reach a certain point, you just say stop, they break down. It might be, say, just an example, a crafting system. And all of a sudden, for the story reasons, you need resources to be managed in a certain way, and you can sort of push the crafting system, but it has a breaking point, and it's just simply not going to work anymore, and you sort of end up never reaching here because there is this sort of wall holding you back. Ways of resolving this issue is just, okay, I'm going to take my crafting system and I'm going to make it simpler so that it's not blocking the game as much. So then you can sort of go through this barrier and you can reach the feature that you want. The other thing is that you take this feature and like, can I contextualize it inside the restraints that I have so I can sort of move it into this barrier? And then, then you have like a way to go. So that's it. This long video, I think, already. Sort of takeaway is that this is where your game is. You start with the game, here it is, and you want to think about like, what is my you can sort of have a sense of the environment you're in by thinking about things like, how are the ideas working out and so on. Do I feel like there is, you can almost, when you talk about the game, when you think about, when you test the game, you can actually get a sense if there are any attraction points. Now, this is where you stand. You don't have a diagram that looks like it. You're never gonna know that after the game is done, perhaps, but not up front. So there might be something here. There might be something here. You don't know. It's sort of up to you as you're making the game to think about this, to consider these sort of things. And things you can do is like you can just give in. Yeah, I'm gonna just get attracted to this certain point here. I'm fine with that. Or you might find that you're attracted to that point, but that shit, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do a cover-based crafting shooter or whatever that is. Like, then you have to do this sort of leap of faith or just do something radical. Like, I'm just removing some feature. I'm just maxing out on something. If it's a jump, like, I'm gonna make our 2D platformer run 3 times as fast. That's sort of like, not literally that, but that sort of feature. So you really get out of the attraction zone of this thingy before you can really break loose. And that's like, that might be how you reach some other features. So if you want this sort of narrative goal here, you can never do that because there's such a strong attraction point here. Like, and you have to just break out of that, and then you can go to that. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Hopefully it was useful.